Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Stefan Luck. I'm the CEO of the World Federation of Advertisers. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, which will look at the case for greater diversity and inclusion in marketing and how WFA wants to champion it. I'm delighted and, to be honest, really proud to introduce our four presenters for today's webinar. It's a truly stellar lineup. Let me start with Belinda Smith. She calls herself on her LinkedIn profile a marketing and diversity activist. She's the former head of global marketing intelligence at EA, and she is the WFA Global Diversity Ambassador today. Our second presenter will be Jerry Dakin. Jerry is Senior Media Director for EMEA Media at GSK Consumer Health. And he's also WFA Global Diversity Ambassador alongside Belinda. We'll then hear from Jodi Harris. Jodi is the Global VP Marketing Culture and Capabilities at AB InBev. And last but not least, Gráinne Wafer, Global Brand Director Guinness at Diageo. A big thank you to the four of them for joining us today and sharing their thoughts on this important subject. Now, we encourage you all to ask questions during this webinar. You can post your questions at the bottom of your screen in the Q&A box. We've set aside 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the webinar in order to be responding to those questions, so feel free to share your questions during this webinar. Now, before opening the webinar, let me say a few words about WFA. For those of you who may not be yet that familiar with our organization, WFA is the organization that brings together brands globally. No agencies, no platforms, no media, only client-side marketers. We have in our membership 120 of the world's largest brands, and we have also 60 national advertiser associations in the top 60 ad markets all around the world. The WFA's purpose holds in 2 words: better marketing. And that's a very good segue into the theme of today's webinar, which is the case for greater diversity and inclusion in marketing. Now, for starters, let me share with you a few figures, which I think summarize the scale of the challenge, but also the scale of the opportunity of increasing diversity and inclusion in our industry. A whopping 86% of CMOs agree that diverse teams are important, according to our WFA Marketer of the Future research, which we ran earlier this year. You add to this that there is solid evidence proving that progressive ads, progressive in the sense of ads in which people can see themselves represented. So progressive ads are significantly more effective in driving business results, plus 25% according to a Unilever research. Now, when you think about it, it's actually pretty intuitive, but it's good to have actually data which is backing this up. Now, despite all this, the reality in 2020 is nowhere near what it should be. Here is how people perceive marketing today, according to an IPSOS research. 72% of people feel most advertising does not reflect the world around them. 63% don't see themselves represented in most advertising. 60% don't see their communities, their friends, their families, acquaintances represented accurately in advertising. In short, a vast majority of people in 2020 feel that marketing is not in touch with society. Now, that's the challenge that we're determined to address head on. We know that portrayals of people influence and impact the way people look at the world. And that's why our endeavor is to make sure that we accurately represent people in our ads. And it's against that background that we have announced to the press on April 21 the launch of the Diversity and Inclusion Initiative by WFA. And we're incredibly honored to count on the support of some of the most respected industry leaders, Sil Saller, Diageo, Mark Pritchard from Procter & Gamble, Raja Rajamanar from MasterCard, Tamara Rogers from JSK, Aline Santos from Unilever, and Jane Wakely from Mars. Now, the WFA Diversity and Inclusion initiative will be spearheaded by our first ever global diversity ambassadors, and you will hear from them in a minute. Their mandate is to make the case for diversity and inclusion, but also, when needed, to debate and challenge. Let's not kid ourselves. Moving the needle will require stamina, it will require fresh thinking, and sometimes it will require also moving outside of our comfort zone. And they will be supported by the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force, a group of exceptional industry leaders who will help set the agenda of this initiative. For those of you who haven't seen it yet, I definitely recommend that you have a look at the Diversity and Inclusion Guide that we released now 3 weeks ago. You can download it from the WFA website under wfanet.org/diversity. It's a very practical guide focusing on considerations for an inclusive workplace and featuring insights from brands. Now, let me emphasize that this initiative is not about competing or duplicating existing initiatives. You should rather see it as a unifying platform with 4 objectives. Now, we call them our 4 C's. We're in marketing after all. So our 4 C's are: 1, convening the industry leaders to ensure that they speak with coherent messaging. 2, curating the best examples supporting the case for diversity and inclusion, and WFA will build an online repository. 3, catalyzing local initiatives to help drive change at the local level, and that's ultimately where it will matter. And 4, challenging to keep pushing industry to do more and have tough conversations when they're needed. Now, that's enough for me. Now it's time to hear from our 4 presenters who will share with us why diversity and inclusion is such an important matter for our industry and how we should go about it. Belinda, would you like to kick us off?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So, hello, everyone. I'm Belinda Smith. I'm really excited to be here today, as Stefan said. Yes, previously at EA, leading all of our content, channel, and audience strategy across all of our properties globally. I've done some time at agencies, at trade associations, so I feel like I've been around the marketing and advertising circles more than a few times. And most importantly, though, diversity is a topic that is personally near and dear to me, and I'm always so excited to speak about it, and so excited that the WFA has embraced it in the way that they have. And I'm also really excited to be here today and not have to convince our audience on why diversity is important. And I think that's a big deal because we have spent a lot of years trying to make the case for diversity, and I feel like we're really clearly past that point now. We know it's important, everyone's trying it, we are starting to measure it, we are experimenting with what works, and I think that's fantastic. And in addition to that, the message that I would add is, in addition to diversity being important, it's also not a monolith. It's not just one thing. Diversity is not about women. It's not about Black people. It's not about Native cultures. It's not even about the colors of the hands on your stock photography. But diversity is about all of these things. And I'm really excited, again, to be here with the WFA because we intend to take a very inclusive and a very broad perspective and approach on this topic, and not trying to approach it from just a singular way. And as only WFA can do, some of the things that you will see from us are a truly global perspective. And what that means is not dictating what diversity must be in every market, but really bringing the differences out in markets and unique considerations out in markets. Certainly the populations of the US are very different than the populations of Australia, for an example, and diversity will look different in those 2 places. So this is a conversation where we can come together globally and really appreciate how this topic is nuanced and how it's different across the globe and tailor our approach and share learnings there. Another thing that I'm so excited to see in this initiative and with this group is that we are really seeking to engage business functional leads and decision makers. So not just the point person who in title is responsibility for diversity, but all of the leaders of the business who have the power to make decisions, to make changes, to impact the business in teams and cultures and make corporations and advertising more diverse. As Stefan already said, our main goal is to extend beyond the press release. So to really champion action out in the world and measure how we're stacking up against that. And lastly, of course, optimizing for impact and also for something that's really important to me, which is culture shift. We talk a lot about diversity being important in the product that we make as marketers. Stefan talked to you about people feeling represented in ads, and that is absolutely important. And I think the heft and the spend and the reach of our communications really demand that those things are inclusive. Another thing that we focus on is, in order to have diverse and inclusive outputs, we have to start with diverse and inclusive teams. So absolutely, we want the impact of our final product to be diverse, but we also want to recognize that our own internal teams and cultures need to shift to be more inclusive, to be more open, and to be more diverse so that we can get to a better end product. So we're really asking you to think a little differently than some of you may have in the past about this topic. Again, moving beyond the human resources capability all the way to the CEO. These initiatives, just as they are not monolithic in talking about one group of people, they also cannot live in the silo of an organization. You can't identify one person or one piece of your organization that's responsible for diversity. It has to be everyone, and accountability has to go all the way up to the top. Speaking of accountability, as we are starting to progress, it's really important that we hold leaders accountable for our diversity goals the way that we hold them accountable for our business goals. And that is, we celebrate their successes and we learn from their misses, and we also offer guidance or redirection or consequence for those misses, just as we would for any other business metrics that we have for our leaders. I think it's also very important that we focus on talent at the top. I'm so energized always to meet with young people who want to come into the business. And I think we talk a lot about entry-level pipelines, which absolutely is important. But again, if we're thinking about who in the organization has the power, the influence, the knowledge of the business, and really the ability to shift what we aim to achieve, we really need to focus on talent at that executive level. And I encourage companies to really think about, when you're making your next executive hire, to put everything in your diversity arsenal into finding that right hire and really thinking about building your leadership team in a diverse and inclusive way, just the same way that you might already be doing for some of your entry-level hires. Taking it another step further, pay equity and promotion parity. So the reason I didn't say pay parity here is sometimes we have to acknowledge that people who are both capable of doing a job, but maybe have different pedigrees about where they went to university or who their professional connections are, that shouldn't mean that they are paid differently for doing the same job. So we really have to think about pay equity across our organizations, and promotion parity as well. We want to get diverse talent in the door, but we also need to support them, and we need to make sure that they're advancing in their careers and that they're advancing through our organizations as well, and putting in systems that support their ability to achieve promotion parity. We always want to decrease churn, but something that we think about measuring, again, is the entry level of people into the organization. Churn is just as important of an indicator, and it's actually an indicator of how open and inclusive your culture is and your ability to really retain and to serve people from different backgrounds that you're trying to bring into your organization. And lastly, something that I really hope we can accomplish is the end of things such as culture fit or intangibles or style. These are really, qualitative measures that get thrown around and really tend to hurt and ostracize people who don't fit within the corporate stereotype or within the corporate culture. So thinking differently about how we talk about talent, about how we evaluate talent, and really trying to level that playing field and produce an equitable organization. So that's just a glimpse of some things that you can do, some things that the task force will be talking and thinking about. And I'd like to end on a quote from our WFA president, Raja, who says, you know, really the challenge for us as marketers is we need to recognize people's demands to be seen and to be heard and to be served. And I think that's so powerful. It's a powerful outward facing statement when we think about our consumers, and it's just as powerful internally when we think about our employees as well. So that's what I wanted to share, and I will go ahead and pass it to Jerry.
Thank you very much, Belinda. Jerry, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, I wanted to follow on from Belinda, and I think echo some of what she was saying, but also talk a bit more about the external representation and the diversity that's important there. I think it's worth acknowledging the slight elephant in the room that, you know, I'm a sort of middle class, white, well-educated, you know, native English speaker. I have a lot of, I'm not a diversity poster child. I mean, not all diversity is visible, but actually a real shout out to any of those people on this call, because I think, you know, being a diversity ambassador, being someone who stands up for it and is really passionate about this topic doesn't require you to feel you're in a minority. You know, we're all diverse, we're all unique. I think it's really important to have everyone stepping up and shaping that. I guess my personal diversity does come in the sense that I'm a gay man. I'm a gay man who grew up in quite a conservative Christian evangelical household. So as a child, there wasn't a lot in my life that kind of externally represented some of what was going on in my head and some of what was going on in my mind. You know, I come from a great, loving, supportive family, but you know, the role models, the people I saw around me, I didn't know that, you know, being gay was something that other people experienced. I didn't, you know, I'm not that old, but it's a time before, you know, YouTube and before the internet was quite so prevalent. You know, you couldn't see other people's experiences, and this, which some of you might recognise, certainly some UK viewers, was a Channel 4 TV series called Queer as Folk, which at the time was a very, very controversial, cutting-edge show that kind of just showed the lives of some gay people on the scene in Manchester. And for whatever reasons, my very conservative parents had let me have a TV in my room. And it was one of those shows I used to sort of stay up late at night and watch. And my mind was blown a little bit in many ways, but mainly because I realized there were kind of other people like me, and that, you know, stuff that I was going through and experiencing and thinking was normal, was part of, you know, who I am and totally okay. And it's really kind of that which has grounded me in this sense that representation matters. Now, that wasn't advertising content. It wasn't an advert, but it was on a TV channel that has adverts. It was on a TV channel that required those brands to still advertise on that show. And I think, you know, we know with hindsight, there were many brands that wouldn't. There were many brands that pulled their advertising and said they wouldn't be seen near that show. But there were enough that stood up and said, yes, we're willing to be there. We're willing to be part of this, that it got made. And so that for me is why representation in our advertising is so important. It's so important that we include in what we create. And it can be, you know, there are some great examples of sort of deliberately inclusive advertising that tells fantastic stories, that really brings to life, you know, some of the struggles, some of the challenges that diverse communities face. But there's also very casual ways of doing it. This was part of our Otrivin campaign in the US. It was a Father's Day campaign. And some of the fathers featured in quite a wide campaign happened to be, you know, co-parenting two men. It was quite casual inclusion. This idea that just in who you cast, how you position people. I'm sure Gráinne will go on to talk about kind of how we portray different genders in our adverts. You don't have to be, you know, completely purposeful about this stuff. Some of it can be quite casual, but you have to be purposeful to get to that point. And certainly having more diverse teams internally will help us. It will make us recognize that some of what we're producing just doesn't reflect the society around us. But there's stuff we can do to fast track that, to really push ourselves now. And beyond that, I mean, I work on the media side of the business, so I don't spend that much of my life thinking about the creative, but I spend a lot of my time thinking about the media dollars and the advertising. And the world is funded by advertising, like my example at the start, you know, TV shows, internet content, across the board, a lot of content is made because advertisers choose it to be. And where we spend our money shapes the content that does or doesn't exist. And so we as advertisers have a choice, and we can either make it consciously or not, to either kind of invest in high quality entertainment, in journalism, in diverse media titles, or we can, usually less consciously, find ourselves investing in, celebrity plastic surgery, slideshow, kind of really low end content. But it's up to us as marketers to take control of that. And we're talking about, billions of pounds that we spend as advertisers. And apologies for the graphic image, but the real reality is, it's nice to talk about a lot of the progress that has been made, but we've seen here in the UK, but I think clearly in the US and many other parts of the world as well, real hate speech on the rise. And one of the things that has fueled that is the internet. I know there was a great debate in Lisbon last year about is the internet, is advertising and marketing ultimately a good thing for the world? Are we actually making the world a worse place? And I genuinely believe that advertisers and marketing is making the world a good place and is funding good stuff. But if we're not careful, it funds really bad stuff. And by not being careful enough about that is one of the reasons why some of this hate speech, some of this fake news, a lot of which is targeted at minorities, at diverse communities, because those are the easy ones to point the finger at, that has found new strength. People have been able to put up very hateful websites, earn money because they get clicks, and advertisers need some responsibility in stopping them. So a quick sideways plug to another part of what we do here with the WFA, the Global Alliance for Responsible Media. It's been fantastic to see many brands stepping up into this area, ensuring rigorous brand safety, ensuring that the best possible settings are in place. I think probably most of the advertisers, probably all of the advertisers on this call really do have solid brand safety settings, really step up in that place. But it's still very difficult to navigate. It's still tough to understand what the settings should be, what should be excluded. I think this difficult time we're in with COVID has sparked a lot of debates around blocking words like COVID. If you block something like COVID, do you find yourself blocking a really, really large part of the internet? How do you bring that nuance? And if you're not familiar with the work, but the Global Alliance of Responsible Media is really trying to bring together this kind of unusual alliance of advertisers, tech platforms, agencies to say, how do we make some of this stuff simpler and better and more universal? But there is a watch out within it that sometimes, brands applying these brand safety settings can actually find themselves excluding audiences. I gave the example of COVID, but there's been research done over the last year or two by Vice and other people, which shows that on some of those keyword lists can also be things like Muslim or lesbian. Brands so nervous about appearing alongside potentially dangerous and risky content that they completely blocklist really, really broad parts of their audience. And that doesn't just mean that you're not appearing next to that content. It means you're not funding that content. It means, Vice kind of fired the alarm on this because they said they can't make positive content about the Muslim community, about the LGBT community without seeing a massive slump in how much advertisers fund it. And so they were struggling to do so. And even more than that, I think advertisers that want to take it to the next level, there are some fantastic diverse media titles out there. There are some partners out there. I think this visual I've actually stolen from Brand Advance, which is a network that works across many of them. There are ways to deliberately chase these people. And all of this stuff about, how we represent ourselves externally, yes, it's good for society, good for people, good for us feeling good in our jobs, but it's also really good for the bottom line of the business as well. Stephen shared some stuff at the start about how advertisers think how consumers think advertisers are not aligned with them, that we don't think that we represent people well. There's lots of evidence that shows that when you truly reflect modern society, you actually get better results. So yes, there's a kind of nice box ticking. We all feel good in our jobs and we're making the world a better place. But there's also, frankly, we're doing our jobs and we're reaching the right people and we're growing our brands. So yeah, that was kind of my challenge, that what we produce and what we share externally has a huge, huge impact, and it isn't just limited to what we say, it's where we say it and who we say it through as well. So I'll stop sharing and pass back over.
Thank you, Jerry. And over to you, Jodi.
Hi, everybody. Let's just see here. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Stefan, team, thank you so much for this opportunity. I hope everybody's doing well today. I'm Jodi Harris, as I've been introduced, and I lead a group called Marketing Culture and Capabilities globally at AB InBev. And our purpose really is all about fostering a culture of learning, a culture of creativity to grow our business and to grow ourselves as marketeers. And diversity and inclusion is really core to this, and is also something that I've been personally passionate about really my entire life. You know, from the early days of university, I fought very hard for Title IX in women's sports as a lacrosse player on a club team. My professional career started in the automobile industry, so a very traditionally male-dominated industry category, all the way through to alcohol, from some time at Diageo and obviously most recently with AB InBev. And we like to say that the category, unfortunately, when we look at advertising in particular, has been very male, pale, and stale. And as a young woman of the legal drinking age, the advertising didn't really speak to me and half of the rest of the population. And so personally, especially as a lead of capabilities, it's my job, it's my duty, it's my responsibility to ensure that our programs, our initiatives, our people are understanding, are open, and actually helping to champion this cause in terms of making our advertising more relatable and ensure that we're portraying people of all diversity. So at AB InBev, diversity and inclusion is actually part of our core principles. It's part of our culture as a company. And you can see it here on the page, and we do everything that we can to ensure that we're recruiting talent and partners, we're developing and retaining people who are better than ourselves. And diversity plays a huge role in that. And I think to Belinda's point, it goes beyond, you know, the stock image, which unfortunately we have here, of colors and gender, but really all sorts of backgrounds and making sure that the environment is as inclusive and welcoming as possible to really breed that creativity, particularly for marketing and innovation that we need to grow our businesses and to grow our brands. We've been on quite a journey, I'd say, in the past few years. And I'm talking about AB InBev as a whole, right, the global organization. We kicked off our diversity and inclusion strategy, not a project, in 2016. And that started with, unconscious bias training for all of our leadership, particularly around performance reviews, and also incorporating leadership capabilities within very specific eye towards diversity and inclusion. We've then introduced new policies like parental leave, domestic violence, and of course our D&I toolkits, which are continuously being rolled out and trained across all of our multiple regions, across over 100,000 people. And then just last week, we kicked off our D&I Council. It's personally governed by our CEO. So Belinda, to your point, we've moved out of human resources, we've moved out of the functional areas, and now it's a cross-functional council that governs our strategy and really pushes for actions across our core pillars. And I actually brought an example of what those 4 pillars look like. So it may be useful to someone on the call to see a framework, which is all basically, supporting our purpose as a company of bringing people together for a better world. And this reflects in a few different ways. So from a people perspective, people is how we define our human resources organization. And some of the things we've been doing here, aside from unconscious bias, is actually bias breaking training for all managers, regardless of performance reviews or not. It's becoming a part of our everyday. We've also incorporated mentor programs with our senior leadership team. So it's a reverse mentoring program as well. From a workplace perspective, we have increased diversity and inclusion in our engagement scores, which is a really a big deal for us. It's about keeping, retaining our employees, keeping them feeling valued and proud of working for our company. And to see those scores increase is actually a good barometer for us. But it doesn't mean the work is done. There's still a lot more to do. We've also created a network of allies, which is a program that includes about 20 plus different employee resource groups, from women in beer to lager, which is our LGBTQ community, and so on and so forth. And depending on markets, you see other cultural affiliations being born nearly, every few months. Excuse me. From a marketplace perspective, and this is the pillar that I lead on the council, this is really about marketing and sales and commercial, but also our supply chain as well. And you'll see some examples here, like our partnership with #SeeHer to help incorporate the tip sheets and the resources they've been able to provide, mainly from a US perspective, into our creative development process. And so really making sure that our creative excellence programming can step up to the plate to ensure that our advertising can evolve and will evolve. And with care, this is actually interesting. So we're actually looking at our agriculture supply chain and ensuring that there's gender equality there as well. Typically, when you look at supply chains, it's less than 10% female, right? So there's a lot of work to do there as an industry. And then lastly is communities. So obviously taking part in things like the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, and then also working very closely with universities and our care program to look at the local community supply chain as well. When we think about our product and we think about ingredients and sourcing and those at that level of community. And so I think just before I hand it over to Gráinne, I think I'm genuinely excited to be part of this task force. And I think there were a few questions coming in on the Q&A around how this initiative would be different than some of the others. And as you can see, AB InBev is part of many different initiatives, and we'll continue championing those with this program here. But what I'm really looking forward to is a global view. Right. So as a champion steward of global best practices, my commitment to this task force, as well as what I hope to get out, is being able to build those best practices and not just look at what one ad did for a company. Let's go and copy, those principles. It's really about how do we change our infrastructure? How do we change our ways of working? How do we change our capability programming to ensure that D&I is embedded within everything we do and not just forced in at the outset? So with that, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this. And Gráinne, over to you.
Thank you, Jodi. Gráinne, over to you.
Excellent. So look, what I'd like to do in the next couple of minutes is just share a few headlines on Diageo's approach. I'll cover a little bit of why it matters to us as an organisation and why it matters, I think, most importantly to the people who are also driving this forward across the business in all of our geographies. I'll talk a little bit about what we've done, the learnings we've had along the way. And by the way, we've learned a ton of things that we've got right. A lot of questions I think were coming in as to how do you start this journey in an organisation, and I'll share some of that as well because I think that's really critical. But I think most importantly for this particular work stream, I want to share where we see the opportunity from coming together as an industry, where we can really make very, very bold and ambitious change on this agenda. So our brands begin and end with culture. And we believe that as an industry, like as Jerry referenced, as Belinda referenced, we have a duty and a responsibility to shape that culture that we all live in and shape the society that we all experience and that our children experience and the future generations will experience. And it's possible for us to be actually part of the problem, and we can add to it, or we can actually be part of the solution. And as advertisers, we spend billions of dollars collectively on the stories we tell, and they're stories that people either recognize themselves in, or they're stories that actually leave vast quantities of our populations, of our consumer bases, feeling unheard, unlistened to, unsupported, and I think, as Belinda said, ultimately unserved. We know there's a big issue across advertising that's being clearly stated in all of the work by Gina Davis, etc., in terms of gender. And we also know that, as Stefan pointed out in the initial slides, that there's a real business benefit to actually getting this right. We're all driving for better work. We're all driving for more efficiency. So anything that can help our work become better, reach more people, and do a better job of engaging our consumers has to be the right thing to do. Why it's important to Diageo is actually because it goes right to the core of what we're about as an organisation. Our performance ambition is to be the best performing, most trusted and respected consumer products company in the world. The business case for organisations that are more diverse has been made in many, many instances. The data is there to be read. And we have made a very conscientious effort to drive more diversity and more inclusion at all levels within the organisation. So, for example, half of our board are gender diverse, our executive team, 40% are women, but actually we have a wide representation of cultures, nationalities, different language speakers across that group. And I think what you do see is the change that drives in the organisation means that when you look up, you see people who look like you, who have experiences like you, and who you can learn from, and who can inspire you. And I find that particularly inspiring working in the organisation. The other thing I'd say is, this isn't just about how we show up externally. It's actually also how we show up internally and how we support our people through policies. And many of you will have seen it. A couple of months ago, Diageo announced 6 months paid parental leave in most of our markets across the world, which has been absolutely transformational for actually the fathers in the organisation who now feel that they can be fully part of the parenting of their children. So ultimately, we believe that anything we do on diversity and inclusion is good for business, good for people, good for the brands, and ultimately good for the societies that we operate within. Now, Sil, our CMO, who's due to retire at the end of June, has been a huge proponent of this change. And she really believes that, we have the power to normalise not just gender equality. We talk a lot about gender in Diageo, but we use all of the frameworks in our advertising to drive broader inclusion. But we start with gender because actually we still have a big issue there in even tackling that first stage of diversity. As we say, as Sil says, we're going in the right way, but we have to make much, much faster progress. And, we've been really trying to accelerate the pace of change that we're making as an organisation on this. We touched a little bit about this, but I think one of the things that's really important is that we don't come at this from a very Western perspective, and that we recognise that across the globe, what's appropriate and acceptable and progressive is actually hugely different. So we started here in terms of really understanding how women and how progressive portrayal of gender varies across the world. And you can see some examples there. For example, safe online spaces, from a matriarchal archetype actually in Latin America. In Europe, women starting to challenge some norms through comedy. In Asia, safety coming more to the fore, or expectations on marriage and societal pressures, etc. So I think it's really important that we do think about how this changes across the world. The one thing that was common everywhere in all of the research we looked at, and we did this across decoding a whole raft of content, not just ours, but also popular culture, to really think about what would be the change. And the one thing that was common is that, people have this appetite for change. They want brands to be involved. They want us to be creating content that represents them and that talks to the tensions that they're facing in society as well. So this led us to the first stage of the journey we went on in Diageo, which was we created a framework which really is about trying to make sure we have progressive gender portrayal, both men and women, in all of our work. And this talks, first of all, to representation, so making sure that people are actually just see themselves in the work that we make. But it's more than just that. It's more than just that. We also have to think about agency. So agency in terms of power. Are the people we're showing in their ad, are they actually driving the narrative? Are they actually in charge of the content? Do they have a voice? The other thing we think a lot about is perspective. So who do we assume the content is being made for? Who do we think is the gaze? Where do we think the camera is being directed? And is there something in the perspective that's inherently gender biased? And then finally, characterization, which is making sure that we just don't have token representation of different diverse groups in our content, and that each of the people we're showing have a great story to tell, an engaging story to tell, because as we know, that also makes better work. So that framework has been rolled out across all of Diageo's marketing teams. It's been rolled out across all of our agencies, and it's used on a daily basis in terms of trying to make our work better. And the reason we felt we needed that was because this is not as easy or as intuitive as it sometimes seems, because we all have bias, we all have content around us that, you know, reiterates this. So we had to create something quite deliberate, and we found it to be a very powerful element. In fact, we worked with Unilever, the On Stereotype Alliance as well, which is the UN body for progressive gender in advertising, to actually create a shared version of this framework, which we have openly shared to the On Stereotype Alliance members. We ran a couple of sessions last November for the WFA, so we shared it, and it's freely available. So hopefully that is something that people can access and use to make their work better as well. And we think it's really important that, you know, we do work together and understand the full supply chain to make that impact that we can have much, much bigger, much broader, more systemic, tackle those really difficult structural challenges that we face within the industry as well. And we can only do that through cross-industry collaboration. The On Stereotype Alliance is one great example of that. It's a forum led by the UN Women's Council to coordinate that change. And we also think about what are the full network of partners we have that we need to agitate for change, I think, within the industry as well. So we recognized that our business needed to evolve just as our business was, just as our brands were. And Sil, our CMO, sent a letter out to the entire agency network asking how they were supporting diversity and inclusion. What steps were they taking to make sure that we were creating diverse teams within all of our supply network as well. That letter asked to share the percentage of women in leadership teams. It asked to share the percentage of women in creative leadership. We asked for information on gender gap and lots more. Now, thankfully, most of the partnerships were incredibly receptive and they really responded to that call for action. And what we learned was that actually a lot of our agencies over-index on leadership and gender balanced leadership within the agency, but where we see a gap is actually on creative leadership, which has also been well documented within the industry. So we decided then that that would lead to an initial partnership we've had with Creative Equals. And Creative Equals it celebrates the amazing talent that have been out of the workforce in agencies for whatever reason, whether it's a carer's gap, a maternity leave, and just how difficult it is to come back in at the end of that period. So we ran Creative Equals events across London, New York, and we're due to do Mumbai in the next couple of months. And that has seen over 50 women return into the agency network. So again, we think that's a really practical step that we've been able to take to sort of start feeding some of the talent back into the industry as well. The other thing we do is we make sure that all of our work includes women in the triple bid system, because there is a negative cycle where creative directors don't get to pitch for work because their work isn't good enough. So we actually insist now that all of our agencies present at least one woman within the creative triple bid system. And again, that has led to great work across our brands, and it has also, you know, immediately increased the amount of female directors that we have on our show reels. And then finally, we do measure everything we do. We have Optimizer, which is our pre-testing for advertising, and our Creative Impact, which is our post-testing. And we actually track our performance of progressive gender, again, both men and women, in all of our content to make sure that the things we're doing are actually creating change. So I think the things we've learned at the end of all this is, firstly, you know, it's not just about, I think, Belinda, you said a press release, or we'd say a PowerPoint presentation. You have to actually think of how you embed this throughout the culture of your organization and how you also create change and champions throughout the organization, particularly if you're a global company. It can't just be the CMO's job. It has to actually think about how does it bubble up in each of our markets as well. So we have a big network, but the big thing I think, and the thing that's most exciting for this particular initiative, is we have found the biggest breakthroughs we make is actually when we collaborate together, when we think about the structural changes we need to make in the industry, and we think about the partners and the ideas that we can bring together to create that faster, bolder, bigger change. And I think that's why I'm super excited to join the team today. So Stefan, back over to you.
Thank you, Gráinne, and thank you to Belinda, Jerry, Jodi for great insights which you shared with the group. We have actually 10 minutes left, which was exactly to plan, in order to be looking at some of the questions we received during those presentations. I have a few here, and I think I will be taking the first question, which is about, let me read it out. How will this initiative work with WFA's work on gender stereotyping and dovetail with other diversity and inclusion initiatives that are already going on in the industry? So let me take that question, given this is more about what our role would be as WFA. So this diversity and inclusion initiative for us is a natural next step after having launched our gender initiative in 2017. We were co-founders of the On Stereotype Alliance, and interestingly, On Stereotype Alliance means on stereotypes. It's a much broader ambition than only focusing on gender. It was an excellent foundation in the sense that it helped bring together the right people, put in place the right metrics, give it global scale, which it should have, encourage local initiatives. But it has always been clear from the very start that the ambition was going to be about on stereotyping rather than about focusing on gender. So there's a sort of natural progression here. And in a way, it's going to be also making it much easier in our interface with our members in liaising with those which are in charge of a diversity and inclusion agenda, which is a much broader agenda than only gender. And that's what it should be in order to be making a difference. In terms of how that's going to be working with other existing initiatives, let me be very clear. I think I referenced that in the intro. This is not about yet another initiative. We want to be a unifying platform and bring in terms of add value what WFA does best, which is look at what really works, give it scale, and potentially also globalize it and support local initiatives. That's what we're best at. That's very much in our DNA. So we're very much looking at working with existing initiatives to be ultimately giving them the opportunity to reach the right scale, and for us to be connecting with the local coalitions, which we all know will have a key role to play in order to bring this agenda to life. We all know that we're not going to fix diversity and inclusion at a global level. What we can do is put in place a framework, a unifying platform, but then enable actors locally to be driving the agenda. And that is where WFA will come in, and that's why we think this is an initiative which is going to be building on the existing rather than compete with anything which already exists. Okay. So that was my answer to the first question, and all the other questions are actually for our presenters. So let me look at this. So I have here a question, interestingly, from a participant in terms of how would you recommend to implement the initiative in a region where there are more restrictive social standards, such as the Middle East? Okay, and I don't want to pick any of our presenters now spontaneously, but is there any one of the four of you who would like to respond to that question? I mean, there are going to be indeed cultural differences. There are going to be regions where some of that agenda is going to be more challenging. So what would be your recommendation in terms of bringing this initiative to life in a region like the Middle East?
Hey,
Belinda?
it's Belinda. I'll take a stab at this again from an internal perspective. One of my roles at EA was actually spreading our employee resource groups internationally and globally. So we ran into this consideration a lot. In Gráinne, I was so excited to hear you mention that safety is a big concern as well. Specifically with our LGBTQ groups, there are regions in the world where it's not safe to self-identify in that way, and definitely not publicly and not at work. And so I don't think that we have yet hit on the key or the unlock of exactly how to do it, but what I can say we saw from an internal perspective is at least holding space and holding a forum for the conversation. So that is not requiring that someone self-identify on a survey, that is, it's not singling people out, but just saying, hey, here's a resource and it's available. You could successfully do that with webinars or on-demand content where people potentially don't have to attend in person, but they can still consume the content. And I think it really is about changing the attitude and the culture of the organization, really normalizing those conversations, and for people who want to engage, helping them to understand that it's a safe space that they can have that conversation, but also I think respecting different cultural differences and different legal differences, and not requiring everybody to show their support or to present or stand up in the same way.
I would say as a global company, which many of us are on this call, there is something powerful and unique about what we can do, though, in terms of global role modeling, in terms of showing what's possible and what inclusion can look like. I think it's been powerful. Those sort of ERGs, those employee resource groups, they often have very senior sponsorship, like Spectrum, which is the LGBT group at GSK, is sponsored by a CEO. SIL was the sponsor of the Rainbow Network when I was at Diageo. And I think even if you're in a country where it's not okay to be out and proud and to wear a rainbow lanyard or do some of those things which some of us get to take for granted, it's really powerful to see the absolute senior leaders in your business talking about that stuff and talking about how important it is. And I also think there are some organizations which many of us do work with, which are trying to use the power of business to change those social standards, to change those expectations and to lobby. But yeah, it's certainly hard. And from the content side as well, I mean, you have to be careful. You can't, create a really powerful LGBT focused diversity message and expect them to show it in some corners of the world. But there are certainly lots of areas of more casual inclusion which we can push and we can drive and support our colleagues where it is possible.
Thank you, Jerry. I have another question, which is potentially also quite interesting for a number of our participants, is how to take responsibility if you're not given the required level of responsibility or the chance to impact the output. So, what about leadership opportunities for those who are middle management and who are not necessarily in a position of making decisions? Anyone volunteers?
I mean, I'm happy to talk to that a little.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's, it is if it's something you feel where you can make an impact and where you can make a difference, then I think you have like a right and a responsibility to agitate for that change within your organization. And, I think most of us on the call came to these work streams through personal passion, personal interest, and a personal kind of commitment to go over and above the call of duty. It's all extra to our other work responsibilities. We take it on in that regard. But my main advice would be to find allies within the organization. Whether they're peers, more senior, or at the most senior level, there will be other people who feel like you who want to make this change. It's about identifying them, creating those networks, and identifying who you think might be the sponsors who can help unlock some of those barriers. So I would just say, don't hold back. If it's something you really believe in, you will find a way of making it happen.
And I would also want to build on that. Please use the materials from all of these initiatives that we've been discussing. And that's a big piece of what the WFA task force aims to do as well, is bring to surface and bring to light all of the best practices, all of the use cases, case studies, internal company research. Stefan went through some of those at the beginning. And there's a hub that we're creating on the WFA site. But a lot of times, if you don't have the responsibility or authority to make those decisions. Sometimes just surfacing to people who do have that power and authority what's happening in the world and in the rest of the industry, and how others are approaching it can be a great agitator as well.
And Belinda, sometimes leading with the case for a change from the proof that this drives better, stronger organization, higher performing in the stock exchange, better performing brands, better performing content. Sometimes the way into that is actually through the business results as well.
Thank you. We've actually lots of questions coming in, but I'm also conscious of time. Let's take one more. Are agencies the missing link, given how much creative output is driven through them?
Do you want me to talk about that as well?
Yeah,
because it was something we felt like when we started the progressive gender training, we felt it was really important that our agencies were on that journey with us. But we also felt that we needed to understand, as I said, the full supply chain and make sure that the partners we work with understand how important this is to our business, our brands, and to our kind of shared kind of cultural mission as well. So I do think working with your partners is really, really important. I think agencies are really, really open to trying to make these changes, and some of the challenges they face are challenges that we as clients can help them with. So for example, how do we make sure that they are able to retain top creative female talent when it goes out on maternity leave? Or how do we make sure that people who are, diverse neurologically and have different ways of approaching things and are, creative and amazing, how can they thrive in the organizations, and how can we allow them thrive in our maybe more staid client meetings as well? So I think, there's jobs for us to do to work with our partners, understand our supply chain, and figure out with them what help they need from us to make those changes. So that would be my perspective on it.
I could add a perspective as well.
Jodi.
I think, it's also us leading by example too. So we need to hold our agency partners accountable as well, which is why our teams need to be just as well versed as maybe some of the more passionate individuals in the organization that are championing this work. But also, many of us have in-house agencies now as well. And I think it's a great way to lead by example, from hiring standards to creative review processes, to different resources that, the agencies, when we do partner together, can actually see us, walking the talk a bit more, walking the walk really.
Thank you, Jodi. We got actually plenty of questions. You can see that there's a lot of passion and interest for the subject. So we'll take the two final questions, and they are specifically directed to you, Belinda, on recruitment and professional development of people from minority backgrounds. First question is, how could organizations appeal to get leaders from diverse backgrounds? And second question, how do you make sure people from these backgrounds can progress at the same rate as their counterparts? You have a minute to respond.
No pressure. First of all, I really appreciate the question, and these are the conversations I love having. Second, I have to first give a disclaimer that I don't, have the solution or the answers here, but definitely some perspectives, and some of them which are informed by my personal experience. I would say the number one way organizations can appeal to get leaders from diverse backgrounds is really, for lack of a better word, walk the talk. To have a diverse, open, inclusive culture already in place. And that is people at the executive and leadership level who have options about where they can spend their time in their next role really want to see demonstrated that commitment. That could be, specific policies or groups, I'm not quite sure, but I think it's really like being diverse already shows that you are committed to it, that you are passionate about it. I think, as I said before, having a commitment at the CEO level, having somewhere where you can demonstrate gains that you are making, or if you're not making gains, changes that you've made. And it could be changes in approach, it could be changes in staffing. But I think really the biggest way to attract diverse leaders is to take your words into action and really show and prove that commitment. And there are a million things for helping people progress at the same rates. But what I'll say is you shouldn't approach this from assuming that people who are not part of your majority corporate culture can't do as well and they need help. You should approach this from the perspective of you're serving the majority culture and you have to make space to be able to hear what those outside of that culture really need and really value. And you have to be able to listen to that, and you have to be able to act on that in a way that makes sense for your business.
Thank you, Belinda. I think we'll have to end the conversation provisionally here, but this is only the beginning of our journey, and there will be plenty of other opportunities. So let me take this opportunity to thank you, Belinda, Jerry, Gráinne, and Jodi, for your presentations today. I think they're a great start, and I think they're just an indication of how interesting it's going to be going forward. I'd like also to thank our participants. We were more than 100 on this webinar. And I'd like to ask participants before they drop off the webinar that they share with us their feedback on today's webinar. And also to tell each of you, if you're interested and passionate about this theme of diversity and inclusion, we'd love to have you be part of our community. So please drop an email to Camelia on the email address you see below, or register on our website. We'd love to grow this community really fast, and we'd love to welcome you in that community. So please give us some feedback on the webinar today, and we hope to see you very soon at our next event. Thank you much to all.